New York City Ballet is never a star company.
On the last episode of Dancing with Shadows.
The star is George Balanchine and his work. That's the star.
So he knew us inside and out. I know Allegra says that he knew us better than we knew ourselves.
He told other people not to instruct me or give input. He wanted to be the only one.
I am eternally grateful for that man.
You're listening to Season 3 of Legacy, Dancing with Shadows, a podcast from Stack. I'm Nikki Anderson, and this is Episode 3, You Are Angels.
It makes me so angry. And even things that are written, why? Why bring that up? I mean, Balanchine was an incredibly sensitive person and a religious person and a funny person. Complicated.
This whole myth that Balanchine, forced the dancers to be thin, or he had relationships with all of his female dancers, or wanted to have relationships with them. That's not true. It's not true.
He just loved women with beautiful bodies. I think that he wanted to possess that. And that was, it could be really looked upon as, gross in today's world.
As our Uber rolls to a stop in a quiet gated community in White Plains, about 30 miles north of New York City, Betty Jane Sills stands waiting for us in the doorway. The street is lined with identical homes, each mirroring the next in almost uncanny uniformity, their neatly kept lawns and trimmed hedges blending into one another. My mind, so consumed by ballet, immediately draws a parallel. The symmetry, the precision. It reminds me of the corps de ballet. French for the body of the ballet, it refers to the ensemble of dancers in a ballet company who perform as a group. Their movements often identical.
Okay. My name is Betty Jane Sills, and I danced as a soloist with the New York City Ballet I was in the company for 11 years.
As she leads us into her home, Betty Jane, or BJ as she prefers to go by, is quick to fire off all sorts of questions. When did we arrive? Who else we were speaking to? Where we were from? Oh, and did we want cookies?
I had a theatrical childhood. I was a child actress on Broadway and television, and went from that life into the New York City Ballet.
BJ is assertive, direct, but with her gingery auburn bob, rounded glasses and smiling eyes, she just feels approachable. I can't help but notice, her posture is still perfect, a testament to her life as a dancer.
Mr. Balanchine used to say we were old bags when we turned 30.
I'm sitting here 26 being like, no!
The emphasis on youth.
The emphasis and fascination of youth is something which is universal in ballet. The body of a dancer needs to be light, moldable and flexible, all things associated with youth. Yet the mind of a dancer, that needs to be of an adult, mature, driven, in control. It's a stark juxtaposition. I asked BJ what age she was when she got into the company.
I was 19.
Wow.
But shortly after I joined, Mr. Balanchine took in a 14-year-old, and Suzanne Farrell was 16. So you see the emphasis on youth.
Yes, I do. Suzanne Farrell. Now there's an important name. That's a story we will revisit later. But for now, keep Suzanne in mind. Her story is central to understanding this world and to understanding Balanchine. What did that mean to you to get in?
Oh, it was the dream of a lifetime at that point.
Every time BJ reflects on her career as a dancer, she is full of gratitude. It's almost like I'm listening to that wide-eyed 19-year-old again.
And Divertimento number 15, where I got to do one of the 5 ballerinas, and that was a huge honor. I learned it in 2 days. One of the dancers was out, injured, and he chose me to learn it. And so that was very exciting. I think all the girls in the company wanted Balanchine's attention.
Unlike Edward and Allegra, BJ never became a principal dancer. The main reason for that, in BJ's mind, is that throughout her career at the New York City Ballet, BJ struggled with her weight. This is something BJ touches on in her memoir, a memoir she was actually discouraged to write. When she first proposed the idea to Francis Mason, a critic who had covered the company and Balanchine for years, he told her she needed a hook.
He told me that I was too normal, and that I hadn't done drugs, I hadn't, slept around for a million men, so I didn't have something that was really, maybe would be considered a hook.
But BJ decided to put pen to paper anyway and tell her story. She published Broadway, Balanchine and Beyond, co-written with Elizabeth McPherson, in 2019, over 45 years after leaving City Ballet.
It was really a very gratifying process because I really found out more about myself than I thought I knew, about reasons for my behavior. And it brought back, things kept coming back to me that I had sort of pushed into the background.
Yeah, do you feel like you got almost a bit of closure from it?
I do.
She would say in the book's intro, almost apologetically, that hers was just a normal story. Nevertheless, the memoir caught the attention of a New York Times reviewer called Helen Shaw, who wrote in no uncertain terms, quote, "The Balanchine look was extraordinary thinness, and Sills, apologising all the while, reveals the mental torture that enforced it. It's disturbing to see her protect a man who insulted and infantilized her. Even now, Sills berates herself for failing Mr. B by gaining 5 pounds during the annual layoff," end quote. Helen Shaw was referring to a comment Balanchine made about BJ's weight. It was a story I wanted to hear in BJ's own words.
All right, I was told Mr. B would like you to lose weight. And I was dieting, right? I was dieting, and slowly I was doing it correctly. I wasn't starving myself. I was eating good food, right? So it took a while for me, but I dropped about 9 pounds. Right? But I did it slowly. And Mr. B called me into his office. He saw me, and he went like this. He felt my fingers, and he used the analogy of Hansel and Gretel, that it was, was a little too plump still.
Helen Shaw followed her own retelling of the story in that review by saying, "Get out." But she danced for that witch for 10 more years. How did that feel in the moment?
Oh, I was outraged. I was really angry. I really wanted to respond to that review.
Her editor told her not to, but BJ couldn't resist. She wrote a letter to the New York Times, which was published online and in print.
So when she wrote that, "Get out," I was living my dream. I was dancing for the greatest choreographer I felt in history, in the history of ballet. And he was interested in me, right? Where would I go? I had no reason and no desire to go anywhere else, right? And, I felt that he was right. I didn't feel that he was telling me something that I shouldn't be doing. He wanted me to be thinner. I needed to be thinner, and I accepted that. I accepted it.
In the letter, confusingly, she talks about the Me Too movement. "I'm talking about the 1960s, she writes. There was no Me Too movement. Far from insulting, the Hansel and Gretel story was amusing to me then, and it still is now. That was just the way he was. For me personally, hearing all this is difficult. When I danced, I struggled deeply with accepting my body. Spending endless hours facing a mirrored wall, clad in skin-coloured tights and an unrelenting leotard, drastically shaped how I saw myself. I was short, not willowy, and I developed faster than many of my friends, my body changing in ways I wasn't prepared for, with my boobs arriving before my mind was ready. I should say, my teachers were wonderful. Never once did anyone tell me I was overweight. But it didn't change how I felt, and I didn't voice it either. I wish I could go back and tell that young Nikki to be kinder to herself. I wanted to do the same for young BJ too. It is widely said that Balanchine had a very specific type among his dancers, what some simplified to tall, pale, and skinny. To some, Balanchine's emphasis on an idealization of a specific body type, coming from one of the most renowned and influential choreographers in history, permanently reshaped the world of ballet.
And he knocked on my chest, and he said, "You know, dear, what is important is to see bones."
I wanted to dig into it further with someone who had a detached perspective, but also who understood the very real consequences of the Balanchine type.
I had a couple of people in my early years who told me, like, oh, you have a Balanchine body.
Dancer, choreographer, and historian Cara Roseborough was the perfect person to speak to. She had never worked with Balanchine directly, and yet she believed her own career on stage was still profoundly influenced by his standards.
And I was like, I don't know what that means. I look at myself now and I'm like, it looks like you could be blown by the wind and flown away.
When she was younger, Cara was seen as the ideal Balanchine dancer because she was 6 foot tall and skinny, except for one crucial difference.
On top of like the long leg, all these body proportions.
She was black.
Balanchine had a very contradictory stance on race, where he would say, the ballerina skin needs to be that of a freshly peeled apple, okay? That knocks out most people.
As well as choreographing and dancing all over the US, Cara has researched the history of Black and African diasporic people within ballet, informing views she shares regularly on her blog, Black Voices in Dance. To her, Balanchine completely redefined the ideal body standard within the dance world.
Prior to the infiltration of the Balanchine aesthetic into the dance world, you saw women of a wider body type variety. You saw women with a larger chest or curves or whatever it is, and that was seen. It wasn't scrutinized in that same way. And then this idea that, the partnering got crazier. It's like, well, in order to lift a guy to lift the lady over the head, spin her like a pizza top, and then, slam her down, you should probably weigh about 5 pounds. Oh, okay. And so I feel like we just entered this really toxic era of these unrealistic expectations, particularly for women. And so if you read and you watch these interviews of people like Gelsey Kirkland and Allegra Kent and people that just rock stars in the ballet world, neoclassical ballet world in particular, and you hear them talking about, trimming their eyelashes because, Balanchine Mr. B said something to them one time, or, always painting their fingernails because he didn't like the way their fingernails looked from stage and things like that. It goes beyond body type. It goes into this modeling business. It goes into this, I need you to fit this perfect mold of whatever you're supposed to be. And it has absolutely nothing to do with actually executing the choreography.
Later in her career, while dancing at Charleston City Ballet, Cara was told that she was overweight. She was only 21 at the time, but still ready to stand up for herself.
And I was like, I actually really like the weight that I am. I like pasta. I like bread. It's not preventing me from doing this art form. It's purely like someone's aesthetic that I'm trying to fit into. Why would I change all these things about myself? I'm this whole human being. And you want me to change for this one person's ideal or whatever? It's like, no.
As she grew up and her body changed, Cara had not just defied the ideals she says Balanchine had established all those years ago. To be skinny, to be white. She had also embraced her own identity.
It's like, I don't want to just be included, I want to be celebrated. I don't want to be tolerated, I want to be celebrated.
Sitting and speaking with BJ now, I couldn't shake the memory of Kara's words, because BJ's story had ended so differently. Like anyone else, BJ's weight naturally fluctuated. At times, she fit the perfect standard.
He was very patient with me. He waited a long time for me to just remain in that ideal weight. And after a while, I got older, new people came into the company, and he did lose interest. He did. And I understood. I understood why.
BJ says she understood why Balanchine lost interest. She knew him. Every dancer knew what was needed to maintain his attention. Everyone accepted it. But the psychological consequences were still there.
What he did let me do was ballets with a long tutu, but the leotard ballets, of course, the ballet in white. I wanted to be taken out of that, I'll be honest, because I felt so self-conscious and so uncomfortable that I was, a little too heavy, and I was wearing these white leotards.
I struggled to see myself reflected in a mirror several hours a week. I can't imagine what it must have been like all day, every day. Especially if the body you so viciously scrutinized was in reality your job. The vessel with which you created breathtaking art. BJ couldn't understand what was happening. She knew she couldn't afford to gain weight. She didn't want to. Balanchine had made his thoughts clear. Her body felt out of her control. Desperate for answers, she sought help from a psychiatrist.
And I think I figured out that I was conflicted about having so-called normal life with a marriage and a family, or becoming a ballerina where I would have to choose between the two. And that was, I think, my fear. So I think I was actually self-sabotaging myself by gaining the weight back.
Balanchine's control over his dancers extended into their personal lives. Marriage and relationships were just one of the many things he frowned upon. Female dancers were not to get married, and BJ was no exception. He demanded total loyalty. He said that any relationships would distract his female dancers from their art.
And I went in to tell him that I was getting married, and I knew he was not happy.
What did it feel like when you told someone who was someone you really looked up to that you told him you wanted to get married and you could sense he wasn't happy? How did that feel?
I was concerned because I suspected that it might have meant that he would lose interest in me, and actually he did. And he said to me, "Well, I hope you're never going to have a baby, dear." And I said, "Oh no, I I'm not going to have a baby now. I want to dance."
BJ did have a child, only 2 years later, but at that point she was no longer in the company. Balanchine always used to tell his dancers not to get married because they would lose their identities as dancers, becoming Mrs. Doctor or Mrs. Lawyer. BJ's marriage ended up not working out, something she later told Balanchine.
I did feel that I had lost my identity as a dancer because of him. So when I went backstage and I saw Mr. Balanchine and I told him, I was still looking for his approval, right? I told him, "Mr. B, you were right. You were right. I did lose my identity." He said, "Dear, you should listen to me. You should always listen to me." And I'll never forget that. That was really...
I wondered what BJ thought of what Cara said, that Balanchine's ideal aesthetic had changed ballet everywhere. Do you think that is true?
I guess I do. I do think that. And there was a girl in the company who he wanted to give her roles. He loved her, the way she moved, but she got heavy. She did get heavy. And she didn't stay. She decided that that was it. I mean, he was, telling her that she was too fat, she wouldn't get the roles, so she left. I stayed, right? I tried to do what he wanted, and so it's interesting. Yes, I do agree.
Ballet dancers' bodies have long been a source of envy, with countless workouts promising ballet bodies just a few taps away. Yet the relentless pursuit of perfection can take a serious toll. Long before external pressures come into play, dancers are often their own harshest critics. Is this why you said in your book that you felt like you failed Balanchine?
Yes, that is why. Or I failed myself a little bit, that's the regret.
After 11 years of service to Balanchine and the company, BJ's dream finally came to an end.
There was one point where I had really lost the weight, and the ballet mistress came to me and said, Mr. Balanchine wants you to pick whatever role you want to learn, whatever ballet you want to be in. And I blew it.
BJ didn't manage to keep the weight off, so those roles never came. The regret BJ has is palpable. It's as if it's sitting in the room with us.
He had lost patience with me, and he took me out of Allegro. He took me and he watched me rehearse it, and I knew something was going on, and I knew what was coming. And Rosemary, the ballet mistress, called me into her office and said, Mr. Balanchine would like you to find something else to do.
After everything, Balanchine did not even deliver the message.
And so basically I was fired.
And if that wasn't enough, BJ was told that she would need to teach her younger replacement.
That was painful. And that's what they did to me. I mean, it hurt. I can tell you that. It really did. I felt shame.
It's as if BJ is viewing her own memories through new eyes.
It just sounds like there could have been someone there to lighten the burden a little bit. Because it felt like you were there constantly trying to do your best for Balanchine, of course, but there wasn't that other figure or that other voice to say, you know what, BJ, you're doing really well, or you know what, you're finding this hard at the moment, but
it would have been nice, it would have been nice. It didn't exist. Nobody came to me and said anything to make me feel better about what had happened. I think that's really a very interesting thing that you bring up. It shows humanity, and it wasn't there at that time. It wasn't.
Teaching your part to your understudy, that is almost a pure-fire way of how to break someone's soul, I think.
It certainly was painful and thoughtless of the administration to just do that. I don't think people realized maybe the pain that it was causing me. I don't think people realized. I don't think they did. Or maybe they did and they didn't care. I don't know. It's never, it's so interesting. It's never been raised before, this issue. No one has ever asked me this.
It's at this point that I notice a tear has slipped down BJ's face. BJ has finally realized that yes, she deserved better. And yes, it wasn't her fault. BJ didn't fail anyone. In fact, people failed her.
And after the book came out, Francis said to me that after he put the whole thing together, he realized that I was the only male that actually could say I was a friend of Balanchine's. And I was kind of surprised.
This is John Clifford, a self-proclaimed friend of Balanchine, a confidant, someone who managed to gain access to the elusive mind of the genius.
They didn't go to dinners alone after a performance, and he didn't do that with Peter Martin, certainly. He didn't do that with anybody else that I ever saw except me. And it got to be a joke because when I was in the corps still, in the corps dressing room, Balanchine would come and knock on the corps de ballet door saying, "Clifford, are you ready for dinner?" And all the other boys would just turn and look at me. You can imagine, and I'd be, "I'm coming, Mr. B, just a minute,"
We heard from John briefly in episode 2. He was a principal dancer and a choreographer at the New York City Ballet, where he staged 8 ballets before the age of 27. John was always looking over Balanchine's shoulder, watching how he worked in the studio, often at Balanchine's request. But the relationship was so much more than teacher and student.
I loved him. He was so funny. I enjoyed his company. My mother divorced. I've had like 5 or 6 fathers. I lost count. And I never really ever had a father figure, an adult male that, was that. And he was. That's another reason why I'm so loyal to him.
This isn't the first time we've heard one of Balanchine's dancers call him a father figure. And it's an interesting dynamic, one that many of us working in a 2025 world would struggle to get our heads around. But unlike Edward, John says he and Balanchine had that click.
He taught me how to drink red wine, which I wasn't into, and he forced me to drink red wine, got me drunk lots of times. That was that life. It never occurred to me in the studio or in the anything to do professionally, it never occurred to me that he was anything other than my boss. And I was very thankful because he was a very kind man.
John Clifford left New York City Ballet in 1974 to start his own company, the Los Angeles Ballet. However, he returned many times as a guest artist, and he says his relationship with Balanchine never changed. He still refers to himself as Balanchine's apprentice.
Most of the directors don't have that warmth about caring for the dancers like they're, his children. But you're their father, whether you like it or not, and Balanchine was the master of that.
Hearing this brings me back to BJ's story, how she said Balanchine dealt with her issues, the emotions she felt. John tells me BJ was one of his first friends at the company, but that he didn't know anything about her weight issues.
I'm not saying that BJ isn't telling the truth or anything. I'm just saying that to me that seems a little out of character.
Or the way she was dismissed.
Mr. B wasn't one to hide behind somebody. If he thought somebody needed to be told something, he would do it. I mean, she wasn't a skinny mini, but she never blew up. I mean, she never got overly heavy that I saw. I never saw that. Balanchine didn't like to fire people. He didn't fire people. Most people just left the company. They got the hint if they weren't getting roles.
Yeah, do you think that was almost a way of kind of not having to fire them? Just not casting them and then they'd leave themselves?
Well, you have to understand, he's responsible for how the company looked. And a lot of his ballets are leotard and tights ballets. And he believed that the audience, he used to tell us this in class all the time, the audience is paying to see something. They're not paying to see what they can see on the street with ordinary people. He said, he'd tell us, you are angels. You are not civilians. So in the leotard and tights ballets, you want to see healthy bodies. You don't want to see an overweight person. In my opinion, I don't want to pay my money, and now it's gone up to hundreds of dollars. I don't want to pay hundreds of dollars to go see somebody overweight, dancing in leotard and tights. Classical ballet is from the gods. It's a higher calling. It takes discipline. It's a vocation. It's almost like being in a church. You have to respect the church. If you don't want to, then don't be in the company. Go do something. Nobody's forcing you. If you love to dance, you can dance in another company. You can dance anywhere,
It's easy for a man to say this. I understand the sentiment Balanchine expressed. Classical ballet is beautiful, even otherworldly, as I've described before. But what John is saying is deeply disappointing. Who decides what a ballet body is? As long as dancers' abilities remain unaffected, what does it even mean to demand to see healthy bodies? The statement itself is flawed. BJ's body was healthy. She was a professional ballerina training rigorously every day. In episode 1, I said I wasn't sure if I put my own kids into ballet because of the way it made me feel about my body. Sure, I was never going to dance for New York City Ballet, but that's not the point. If we keep reinforcing this narrow ideal, all we do is push people away from what is, at its core, a beautiful and transformative art form. And I can't help thinking of Balanchine's famous quote. He didn't want to work with dancers who wanted to dance. He wanted to work with dancers who needed to dance. He knew the dancers he picked would prefer to conform to his beauty standards than risk not dancing at all. What was once one man's vision has now become an unspoken rule. The fact that Balanchine's self-proclaimed closest confidant is saying this in 2025 only reinforces how deeply ingrained this mentality is. And we spoke to one person outside of the New York City Ballet who said that Balanchine set an almost precedent for then ballet kind of even outside the New York City Ballet of what ballerinas especially should look like. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. I am so angry. I'm glad you brought this up. I am livid about this myth that Balanchine somehow imposed super thinness to the point of anorexia on the ballet world. Now, Balanchine made a mistake one day in an interview. I think it was filmed in Canada, in Montreal, when they were filming, because he said he likes to see bones. So that came out of his mouth. And he said he likes to see bones, he likes to see big feet, small heads. He made this kind of generalization, which has been taken as gospel. I mean, the times he would take care of dancers, so this whole thing about it just infuriates me. And a lot of it came from Gelsey's book, Dancing on My Grave.
That name again, Gelsey Kirkland.
Gelsey Kirkland's book, I Want to Shoot Her Because of Her Book, has started all these myths about him giving drugs to the dancers to keep them thin. Gelsey gave an interview on 60 Minutes where she talks about, they wanted her to turn out her legs so much at the school that she was breaking her ankles, and that Balanchine, was pushed. I wanted to shoot the TV because it was like, Gelsey, you were doing drugs. You don't have a clear memory of those years. You're hallucinating.
Did you read the book?
Of course I read the book.
Did you ever speak to her about it?
Yes. And she said, well, that's how I remembered it. I said, yeah, because you were doing drugs.
What did she say to that?
She kind of nodded. Well, she did apologize publicly.
John is referring to a 2007 Dance Magazine interview in which Gelsey was asked what she would do differently in her career. She responded, "I would like to be able to do it all again as a grown-up." Then she took a moment and said she'd apologized to the people she offended in Dancing on My Grave, naming Baryshnikov and Peter Martins, saying she, quote, would have liked to have had the wisdom to keep her personal problems out of the work, but that's life. Gelsey never mentioned Balanchine in her apology, perhaps because he had already passed away, or perhaps because she simply didn't want to. I've spoken before in this podcast about honouring someone's experiences and truth, but in this instance, I want to challenge John's version of events. Just because his experience with Balanchine was positive, doesn't mean that everyone else's was. This pattern isn't unique to ballet. It exists across many disciplines, wider society and politics. The tendency to dismiss victims simply because the person in question has helped others or bestowed greatness. But one truth does not erase the other. Can you acknowledge that just because you didn't witness something, that means it also still could have happened?
Anything can happen to anybody behind closed doors. But to something to the extent that people have talked about is so out of character that I find it, if it's so out of character, it's suspicious to me. Was he a saint? No, he wasn't a saint. He fell in love. He fell in love with some of the girls through his life. They were his muses. He fell in love. He wanted to marry them. And he married most of them. He was like Pygmalion. He created these Galateas all the time and then fell in love with them, wanted to marry them. And if they said no, he would move on to the next Galatea and he'd make another one.
One muse, who I promised you we'd come back to, is the most famous of all, Suzanne Farrell.
Balanchine's company was the center of American ballet, and she was the diamond in its crown.
The pair first met when Suzanne joined the New York City Ballet in 1960. Suzanne turned 15 that day. Balanchine was 56.
George Balanchine hand-selected Suzanne Farrell from obscurity in a regional tryout in Ohio as a teenager. She lived the ballerina dream.
That's Jim Steichen, the ballet historian.
Within 2 years, she has been promoted from the Corps de Ballet to be a principal dancer and is the centerpiece of some of the most important work being produced by one of the most important choreographers in the world.
As the most prolific of his muses, Jim says Suzanne inspired Balanchine's most notable years as a choreographer throughout the 1960s. But her story also reveals the darker side of this dynamic. When he was in love with Suzanne Farrell, what was that like to witness?
Well, it was tricky because it was harder on the girls in the company. It wasn't hard on me, but it was very hard on the girls in the company, the same age as Suzanne. Not the older ballerinas, but when he was in his height of obsession. He was obsessed with Suzanne.
But before Balanchine became obsessed with Suzanne, Suzanne was obsessed with Balanchine. Aware of the power he wielded within the company, she later reflected in her memoir. It required no proof, she writes, other than a simple, quiet presence in a room, to believe with calm certainty that he could make or break a career. I kept account in my diary of any and all Balanchine sightings.
But when he worked with Suzanne, it's almost like they had one brain. She was very clearly the quickest study of all the girls in the company.
Farrell was destined to be a star.
He could even with her just even indicate. It was almost like they had telepathy. And it was creepy in a way because he would just indicate something and she would do it beautifully, which pleased him. And all I can say is he's human. He was a human. And one of the girls, I'll tell you, I won't say her name, but one of the girls confronted him publicly and said, basically, you're giving Suzanne too much attention and we're blah, blah. And he said, well, I have a right to love. And then she said to him, well, you should love all of us equally. Well, that's not possible,
Suzanne's memoir tells the story of a young girl dealing with the attention of an older man in power, a man who holds the keys to her career and the blueprint for her future. She said that as Balanchine's interest in her increased, it seemed as if she was wearing a "do not touch" sign around her neck. It became a joke among the men in the company that if anyone bruised her in partnering, his job would be in peril. But it was a joke nobody laughed at. As Balanchine's obsession grew, the quantity and level of the dances he choreographed for her grew too. Just like with Allegra a decade before, many of these works were seen as messages from Balanchine to Suzanne, declarations of love. And as this continued, Suzanne said that in dancing Balanchine's life on stage, she was becoming part of it off stage.
It was very clear. He could not separate the ballerina from the woman, which made reasons his marriages didn't work, because he couldn't, they were the one and the same. The muse, the ballerina, the woman, they were all one thing. And when the woman matured or she wanted to have children, they no longer were the ballerina. So he started losing a little interest. And his wives divorced him. He never divorced a wife. They divorced him when they realized that he needed to move on to a new muse. And they said, go, just do it. We understand who you are, what you are. You're a creature. You're a genius. You're this. Just do your thing. But there was never any bitterness. There was never any hard feelings.
There's something John's not mentioning. Something I need to explain to you. Balanchine was in love with Suzanne. That is clear. But how far that love went, what it did to her career, that is the elephant in the room. They had a deeply complex and intense relationship, both artistically and personally. In every sense of the word, they were a couple, confiding in one another over dinners after performances. BJ even told us that Balanchine, who would usually watch every performance every night from the wings, started leaving the theatre early with Suzanne after her part in that night's dance was complete. The company was no longer his sole focus. For Balanchine, it was now all about Suzanne. A line from Suzanne's book is ringing in my ears. We did everything but sleep together. Suzanne didn't love Balanchine. Not like that. He was 41 years her senior. She was a young, innocent, and devoted dancer. In her memoir, Suzanne explains how her first engagement, which was to a man outside the company, ended when Balanchine noticed the ring in her finger and exploded, saying, "I don't like it, take it off." A week later, he proposed to her. When she refused, he grabbed the ring and threw it across the room.
Like I said, his unrequited love affair with Suzanne Farrell was quite traumatic. And I was there before and after. And when she left the company, he was devastated, but he didn't want to show it to anybody because he had his pride, But with me, no. We'd go out to dinner afterwards and he'd get drunk and cry,
When Balanchine started to grow thin and withdrawn, the other dancers urged Suzanne to resume their outings to make him happy. One male dancer even suggested she sleep with him. It doesn't have to mean anything, they told her. Was it such a big deal?
He's making all these great ballets for her. She's keeping his attention every way possible, which is smart of her. Why not? You got a genius choreographing for you. Wouldn't you want to have his attention? My God, And when it came down to wanting to marry her, she didn't want to marry him, and she told him no. And she married a boy in the company and left, and he was crushed, and he never recovered.
Feeling suffocated by his obsession and finding love with a fellow dancer, Suzanne married Paul Mejia in 1969. Balanchine, devastated, proposed again, even suggesting they have a child. Suzanne declined. The relationship unraveled swiftly. Suzanne was asked to teach understudies for her roles, a move she believed was Balanchine's way of reminding her that everything he had given her, he could take away. Before they knew it, she and Paul were sidelined. Pushed to the edge, Suzanne issued an ultimatum. Either Paul was reinstated in that night's performance, or they would both leave. Balanchine refused. On the 8th of May, 1969, at just 23, feeling as if she had no other choice, Suzanne Farrell walked away from the New York City Ballet. The power of Balanchine's obsession could not be understated. It cast a shadow over the whole company. This is from Kelsey Kirkland's interview, where she admits that she changed her appearance just to look more like Suzanne Farrell. This was at a time where plastic surgery was a new phenomenon. It was in many cases unsafe.
It was total insanity.
Wait a minute. Silicone in your mouth?
Yes.
In your lips?
Yes. Because I felt that he had such an obsession with her face.
However, to everyone's surprise, in 1975, as Balanchine's health declined, he invited Suzanne back to New York City Ballet, signaling a reconciliation. Upon her return, she reclaimed her place as Balanchine's leading muse. Their relationship remains one of the most fascinating in ballet history, marked by genius, obsession, devotion, and heartbreak.
And I realized, he is really frail.
But it was not long before Balanchine's health began to fail. In January of 1983, John got a call from Balanchine's longtime secretary, Barbara Horgan.
She said, he's in the hospital, he's not going to come out. She said, if you want to see him. And nobody knew exactly what was wrong then. They knew he was falling, he was breaking a rib, he was fading, but nobody had a real diagnosis. She goes, if you want to see him, you should probably come.
It was reported that one of Balanchine's doctors at the time said they stood at the end of his bed and shook their heads a lot. They thought he was dying of his own disease, one he invented. It was only after his death that doctors knew the cause of it. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a rare and fatal condition that affects the brain.
And I had been away from the company, so I hadn't been around him that much when he started to get dizzy. And
former soloist Susie Villar had been collaborating with him on a revival of On Your Toes, a ballet he first staged in 1939.
By this fall, he couldn't do the last casting of On Your Toes. He went to the hospital, I think in September of '82, and then he never came out.
Over the next 6 months, the last of his life, many of his past dancers would visit Balanchine in hospital. His most loyal devotees came from wherever they were in the world to visit their icon, father, God, one last time.
I don't know how many months before he passed that I actually had been to visit him, but I remember my friends and I there was a coffee shop we met near the theater, and then I remember that Suzanne was walking by, and then we grabbed her to come in with us, and, it was terrible, but it was inevitable.
Talk amongst dancers spread that Balanchine had begun making passes at some of the women who visited him in hospital. Noticing Darcy Kistler's absence, John asked her, the last ballerina to be trained and hired by Balanchine, why she hadn't gone to see him.
And I said to Darcy, aren't you going to go visit him? And she goes, no. And she said, because he's grabbed a couple girls. And I said, so what? I made Darcy cry. I feel bad. I made her cry because I said, he's George frickin' Balanchine. I said, his brain is gone. If it makes him happy, to cop a field, then what the hell? But that's how I felt about it. I mean, he's not going to rape anybody or anything, and his brain is going, so if he pats your butt, why are you freaking out? But some of the girls were freaking out.
I think it's important to be absolutely clear. What John is saying is abhorrent. No woman should ever have to put up with unwanted sexual attention, regardless of who the person is, what they've contributed to society, or even what they may have given that individual. This is exactly why I asked John if he still believed this now. I wanted to give him the chance to take back his words, to recognize the harm in them. Do you feel the same now?
He was in bed. He was bedridden. But the most he did was pat a butt. And I think at one point, one girl says he reached for her breast or something. He reached up to touch her. But his brain was going, have a little pity. Have a little empathy. And I'm going, well, this is ridiculous. Look at all he gave us. Look at all he gave the world of ballet. Look at all the ballets he did for you that you're living off of by dancing his ballets. Can't you just be a little more generous? I mean, that's my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Unfortunately, he didn't.
I remember the day he died, the internal parts of the theater where we worked got very dim, worn, truly worn.
On the 30th of April, 1983, the unthinkable happened. George Balanchine died. What was it like when Balanchine passed away?
That's such an enormous
question.
It's hard to just give a short answer to that.
Hundreds of dancers appeared at his funeral.
The coffin was open.
Including BJ.
And the ballet master, John Tarras, had said, come forward. We're family, come forward. So I came a little bit, into the front of the line, and we were filing past the coffin. And I had never seen anyone in an open coffin before. And many of the dancers, they completely lost it. They got hysterical. I walked by and I looked, and it was so interesting because I didn't cry, I didn't lose it. I felt that it was just a shell and his soul had gone somewhere else.
The most extraordinary thing about Balanchine is how, more than 40 years after his death, he remains so resolutely alive in his dancers' minds. It's as if he lives on through them, alongside them. And even now, they still feel like they owe their lives and career to this man. So we asked them, if they could say anything to him now, what would it be?
You gave me everything, gave me my whole life, and thank you. That's what I would say.
I was not the perfect guy in your company, but you were the perfect guy for me.
I'd have to have a dream and find out what I'd say to him. Here's a dream that Balanchine told us when we were dancing. I think it was Salzburg, and we were doing his ballet, Divertimento number 15, music by Mozart. And he said, "Oh, last night I spoke to Mozart," and he sort of gave the conversation to everyone on stage, and we were laughing, and then we were crying, and then we were laughing, and I thought, he really did speak to Mozart. It was that communication, greatness with greatness.
When I would go to the ballet and I would be in the city and I would be walking by the stage door or walking by the theater itself, I would think that I would see him coming toward me in his raincoat.
I dream about him all the time. And the dreams are really fun because I'm back in New York at my age, right? He's still alive, older, but the way I remember him, more vibrant, not the very last years, but more vibrant. And sometimes he asked me to dance, and I said, "Mr. B, I'm an old man. I cannot get out there in tights. Forget it." And we'll have these funny conversations, or we'll talk about the company. I'll be watching a performance, and I'll feel him tap me on the shoulder. So I got a tap on the shoulder one day, and I heard him say, "Not bad."
Balanchine's complex legacy still looms over the ballet world. The power he wielded over his muses, the blurred lines between mentorship and control, the enduring debate over whether they were groomed or not, his relentless standards, his handling of dancers' weight, and the unspoken rules he imposed continue to spark controversy, decades after his time. The man was a genius. But at what cost? Can the relentless pursuit of greatness ever justify the suffering it leaves in its wake? Is art ever worth such a price?
George Balanchine was a choreographic and artistic genius, full stop. George Balanchine also had troubling relationships with his female dancers. That's also true. Those two things can be true.
In his will, Balanchine did not leave a single one of his 400-plus ballets to the company he founded. Instead, he left them with more than a dozen dancers and friends, including Jerome Robbins, his last wife Tanaquil Leclerc, and Suzanne Farrell. Many believe this was because Balanchine saw the company as inseparable from his own presence. It was as if Balanchine could not imagine the company continuing without him.
Balanchine was an existentialist. There's no past, there's no future. I live in the continuous now. Now is all there is.
In many ways, we all hope to leave a mark, to make the world a little different, perhaps even a little better than how we found it. For some, it's in the small, everyday acts of kindness. For others, it's through activism or bold attempts to change the world. But then there are the rare outliers, the 1 in a million individuals who transform the very space they inhabit, leaving it forever altered. In the world of ballet, for better or worse, that person was George Balanchine. There were several potential successors to the company. John Clifford was one of them. He had always believed he was destined to step into Balanchine's shoes.
Yes, Balanchine originally, when I was in the company, said, "This is going to be yours someday." He said that to me.
But he was in for a shock. Balanchine's successor was another dancer, Peter Martins. What was it like to watch the company transition from Balanchine under new direction?
Knife in the heart. And it's worse every day.
On the next episode of Dancing with Shadows. And she says, in 1994, I began to write a book of essays about my life and dance, mostly as an exercise. When the Me Too movement began this year, I knew it was time to brush the dust off and take another look. Although incomplete, these essays address the roots that have long run between sexual abuse, alcoholism, and ballet. It's painfully clear that my story is the same story that has occurred thousands of times all over the world.
In this essay, she's basically saying that this culture she's describing has gone back to Balanchine, not just Peter.
She was there for both of their leadership.
Right.
So we need to speak with her.
Definitely. Yeah.
Dancing with Shadows is a Stack production. It was written by me, Nikki Anderson, and co-produced by myself and Finn Ranson. Our assistant producer and fact-checker was Holly Morris. Original theme music, additional music, and sound design by Tom Wally. Our script editor was Sam Diss. Executive production by Luke Moore, John Teague, and Charlie Morgan.
Legacy is a Stack production and part of the Acast Creation Network.